Welcome to Interviewing from a Distance. I'm Sharon Melareyes, one of the Associate Directors at Yeshiva University's Career Center. And this event is brought to you by Yeshiva University's Career Center Professional Series. Joining me this evening are Samantha Feldman and Alex Cohen-Smith. Tonight we're going to be talking about virtual interviewing and its impact, particularly as the pandemic hit and how it has revolutionized, I think, in many ways, how we are interviewing in this current climate. There are two types of interviews when it comes to virtual interviewing. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it. One version of it is having pre-recorded interview questions sent. You're sending the responses back to a potential employer, and that's just a one-way interview, right? And then the alternative to that would be what we would have right now, which would be sort of a Zoom session or any other platform where you would actually be speaking one-on-one or in a group setting with others. So we'll be talking about the variations of those. So if you'll join me this evening, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you should expect from this event. So we're going to go into what our learning objectives would be. At the end of this session, our hope is that you would successfully prepare and learn about preparing for virtual interviews. You'll understand the new trends in the industry as it relates to this topic, and you'll have some reference sites and resources to support you for future interviews. So we'll start off with having Alex and Samantha tell us a little bit about themselves. If we could start off with Alex. Alex, if you could let us all know, I know you're the president of healthcare staffing, that particular division at Mitchell Martin. You can start off with telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me here tonight. I've been with Mitchell Martin, actually today is my 10-year anniversary with Mitchell Martin. I've been with the organization for 10 years in numerous capacities, started as a recruiter. Mitchell Martin is a staffing firm that's been around for 36 years, focusing on not just healthcare. Actually, the first 9.5 or so years of my career was actually more focused on our financial clients. I recently moved over and took over our healthcare division, actually just around the time that the COVID pandemic started. So again, I've been with Mitchell Martin for almost 10 years, primarily in the recruitment support, as well as leading recruiters, training recruiters. Formerly, I was a recruiter, and now I'm running our entire division that's focused on healthcare staffing here in the tri-state area.
Great, thank you. And Samantha, I know you are an alum of Stern College for Women, and You're now the Assistant Director of Communications for New York City Hospital's Health and Hospital Gotham Health. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hi. So graduated art student 2012. Kind of started with a nonprofit background, having interned a lot at YU at different nonprofits that really opened the door for me to work for NCFY Center and to manage their database for a while. I went back to school to part-time while I was working to pursue graphic design. And ever since then, I've been at different marketing agencies, mostly boutique style, smaller full service agencies that offer the gamut of services to many different types of companies, nonprofits. And most recently this year, I've moved on to Gotham Health, which is Gotham Health is the ambulatory clinic side of Health and Hospitals healthcare system. So it's all the clinics and the neighborhood health centers. So I'm on the communications team where we basically service what the clinics need for marketing their services and to reach their audiences.
Great, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. So we'll start off with our first set of questions. The first thing we wanted to learn a little bit more about is what is your experience with online interviewing from a professional side? Either one of you can take the question.
Maybe you can go ahead and start.
I'm happy to go first. Mostly my experience from the professional side of things is being part of reviewing candidates at previous jobs. We actually did use video interviewing before it was cool during the pandemic. And we would do both parts. We would do the both types that you spoke of. So we would we actually have a pretty detail-oriented application process, which part of that was reviewing material and submitting a video where you would answer certain questions, and we just kind of got a little taste of what that person was about, and how they could, you know, kind of digest the information we had them review. It was kind of like a mini assignment. And then sometimes we would also, if they were far away and didn't want to, you know, we wanted to kind of have them a little bit of an easier time for the first interview, we would have them do a Zoom interview similar to what's coming to be popular now. And like what I guess I'll talk about it more, but what I'll just say briefly is that we made it pretty detail oriented on purpose, because you want to kind of see how seriously someone takes the opportunity, and you want to see what are the types of things that people will take the time to do. If you're asking someone to apply for a job, you hope that they take it seriously. And that's kind of my answer on that.
Perfect. And Alex?
From my perspective, I've been interviewing people both for my company, for Mitchell Martin internally, as well as for our clients. Again, working for a staffing firm. You end up, obviously, I was a recruiter for a number of years. Now I'm leading teams of recruiters. We do a lot of interviewing for our clients as well. Part of what our company does, and our responsibility to our clients, is to do the initial screening. So online interviewing is something, as Sam said, we were doing before it was cool. We've been doing online interviewing for a long time. I actually manage a large team of people in Manila, in the Philippines. So the good portion of my interviewing process and my team's interviewing process with those candidates is done via some form of video. So it's something that we've been doing for a while. Obviously, it's something that's become even more prevalent, not just for our people in the Philippines, but for people that we're interviewing internally here in the stateside as well. And obviously with our clients, it's becoming more and more prevalent, in the current environment that we're in. So it's something we've been doing for a while.
Great. And before we transition to our next set of questions, I did want to get a poll out to the students just to get a sense of the group that's here. If the students would be so kind as to complete this first poll question. We're asking you all, have you participated in virtual interviews in the past? So we'll give them a few more minutes. Almost there. Great. So the poll is closed, and about 53% of the students in this group have actually participated in virtual interviews, and 47% have not. So that's just to give us some perspective on how we should be addressing the next set of questions with you all. So our next question is, how have you prepared, either personally or have you instructed others to prepare for online interviews different from in-person interviews? What would you recommend? What are your suggestions when you mentioned something that was detailed in your packet information, Samantha specifically. What would you say the students should be doing?
So I think the main thing that I kind of wanted to have you take away from this is that you can't prepare too much for an interview, and then there's the added challenges of like a video interview where you need to make sure that your technology is working. I think if I say anything tonight, I think the number one thing I wanted to say is that you need to check your technology 24 hours before the scheduled interview to make sure that you're ready to go. Last minute emergencies can happen. Maybe something will come up right before your scheduled interview. And it's just really important that your microphone is working, your speaker is working. If you need to have headphones so that there's no background noise, you get headphones. It's going to just add a layer of professionalism to the experience. And it's going to just, if there's anything that you could have prevented on your side with your technology, it's just a missed opportunity. So I think that was just the number one thing I wanted to emphasize, is that along with everything you need to do to prepare for an interview, your technology in this day and age needs to be, kept up. Your Zoom needs to be updated. All those little things really do add up, because it can delay the time that you have with them and that kind of thing.
Great.
I would agree wholeheartedly, and I would add another piece, which is I think it's important. And again, as I referenced earlier, I've been with my company for 10 years, so my level of interviewing outside personally, has not happened as much over the past 10 years. But obviously, I'm talking to a lot of candidates and people that have had interviews. And if I could give you another suggestion as it relates to preparing, it would be put on the outfit that you're going to wear for your interview. At least a half hour before the interview. Number one, you don't want to be rushing to put something on. Number two, most of us, when we're in an interview, temperature raises a little bit, you get a little hot, all of a sudden you're sitting there sweating while you're in the interview. Better to just get yourself adjusted to sort of the attire that you're going to have on in the interview. I definitely agree. You want to prepare, 24 hours before with your technology. I would say prepare also 5 minutes before. If it's a Zoom or something like this, just make sure you log in ahead of time and that you're all kind of set up. I mean, take even something like this, for example. It's not an interview, but myself, Sam, Sharon, we were all logged in beforehand just to kind of make sure that our technology was all good and working and smooth, ready to go. So nothing wrong with double checking, triple checking. In online interviews, to go the other part of your question, online interviews aren't that different, I think, from a candidate's perspective than in-person interviews. From a client's perspective, I think they're actually really tough. I really read body language in an interview, and it's difficult, body language and eye contact. And it's much tougher to read from a client's perspective in an environment like this. But from a candidate's perspective, it's pretty much the same kind of thing. I just do think it's important. You've been sitting, and maybe you sit at home all day in your shorts and a t-shirt, and you're hanging out. If assuming, again, we can get to it later, but I would definitely recommend changing it to something else for your interview. But when you change for your interview, put it on, a half hour to an hour before. Get yourself in that mindset, and also just get used to sort of what you're going to be wearing when you're having this conversation.
Right. Just to touch on attire for a moment, we get questions from students saying, should I be wearing a suit? Should I wear the suit jacket? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you dress for the job you want. Not the job you have. I've always been a believer in that, and that same goes for when you are, on a video interview. The place you're interviewing for, even if it's not a job where you'd be wearing a suit every day, I don't think you'd necessarily have to wear a full-on suit and tie, but definitely a button-down shirt. I would say probably something a little even a little nicer than what I'm wearing right now. For an interview. If you want to go all out and put on a tie, I don't think they're gonna hold it against you. If anything, it's a talking piece. I'm a firm believer that in your interviews, you obviously have to go outside of just what the talking points are about the specific requirement. Anything you can do to build a relationship with a person, that's in any interview, not just an online interview. So if they comment on your attire, and maybe they even comment that your attire was too much, you can make it into a joke and make it funny. And again, I think any way that you can stick out, good thing.
Yeah, and that's even kind of worst case scenario, but I don't think that's very rare for anyone to say you were too dressed up for an interview. It's not going to hurt you that much. I just wanted to share also, as one of my previous jobs, when I was like part of reviewing candidates, we had just a little story that we had a candidate that really met all the qualifications we were looking for. She was ready to be on location. And for the in-person interview, honestly, she wasn't dressed as if she was taking the opportunity seriously. And it was definitely a red flag for the team after she left. I don't remember why the job didn't work out specifically. I don't think that was the reason why she didn't get it. But at the same time, it's not going to hurt you to, as Alex said, dress for the job you do want. even I do that every day. I get a little dressed up for work because it makes you feel better. That's all.
I've had people get rejected from jobs that we have recruited them for, because of what because partially a good portion of what they wore. They were so underdressed and didn't represent themselves well as somebody, in part based on their attire. And I've never had somebody not get a job because they overdressed.
Right,
Appreciate
exactly.
you both sharing that. We just received a question from a student in the group that would like to know, should you be looking at the camera when you're having the interview or looking at the screen? What are your thoughts on that? I know it can be a little bit overwhelming to see yourself at the same time. What are your thoughts on that?
If it's distracting, I mean, it depends on the mode of technology you're using and what's available for you. But I think looking at the screen, if it's like two different vantage points, is going to be better for the person interviewing you, just so that they can see you looking head on. But I would say also, if it's distracting to see yourself, if you have to minimize the screen where your face is showing, or cover it up with something else on your screen, that's probably going to be the best bet to get you focused to be answering the questions, because you don't want to be too self-conscious about how you're appearing and all that.
Right.
I think a lot of the tools have the ability for you to hide yourself actually as an option. So you can, even Zoom right now, like if I go over, I can actually hide self view. So I don't have to, see myself if I didn't want to. I'm very vain. I like to look at myself. So, I'm just staring at myself this whole video. But anybody can, look at that. And again, on Zoom and other technologies, you can hide self view so that you're only looking at the person. That way you wouldn't see yourself. It really depends. I know some people have cameras, like my laptop has a camera built in at the top, so I'm just looking into the camera right now, and it's right above the screen, so it really doesn't affect the eye view. If you have a camera, that's up left or upright, I try to look at the camera as much as possible. Again, you want to make it like you're talking to the person. Trying to make it as conversational as possible. And then what would you be doing if you were in the interview? Be trying to make eye contact and look at the person. So I would be doing that as much as possible.
Perfect. Would you say, we talked a little bit about attire and so forth, is there a variation in the level of preparation, meaning how familiar should they be with the role, with the company? There's no variation. I think from our perspective, we don't think there is. I think we want to make sure the students understand that there isn't a variation in that element either. Is that correct from your point?
Online versus in person, it doesn't matter. You should, when you're going in an interview for a job, the company is going to expect that you've done some background research on them. If you're working with a recruiter, hopefully you talk to the recruiter about the specifics of that position, any kind of prep they can give you about the person you're talking to, but you should do your own research too. Look up the company, if you know who you're going to talk to, look them up on LinkedIn, maybe even have that up, have a couple questions or things to talk about. It just shows a level of interest that takes things to the next level. I haven't checked my LinkedIn in a while. I think I used to have like some of my old internships pre-college up there that were all focused on working with sports teams. And I remember when people would come in and interview with our organization, people would bring that up. I always liked it. It was a conversation piece. It showed me that they, had done a little bit of background research, that they were at least interested enough to do that. And it made me take my guard down as the interviewer a little bit and open myself up to a little more just sort of general conversation and building a relationship with them, which as the person being interviewed is always the goal.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
I was just going to add one thing that I always add as part of the preparation for an interview. I used to always make sure that I had, this might sound silly, but I would have questions prepared that I wanted to ask about the position, about the company. I didn't not things that were fluff or didn't matter, but things that, how would this work if I was actually at this job? What would it be like? What's the team dynamics like? Things like that. That's really showing that you're taking a personal interest into the position.
Great.
Just to add on that real quick, Sam, I think that's a great point. And as interviewing from home, you have a unique position and unique ability to be able to actually have a sheet of paper in front of you, be able to do that. or even up on your screen, right next to, the Zoom. You can have a list of questions that you want to ask, right up there on the screen. They can't, you're not doing a screen share, or maybe you are in some cases, but if you're not doing a screen share, they can't see your screen. You can have half your screen being the video, half your screen being your questions. You can have it printed out next to you. You can have it handwritten. However you want to do it, you have something you may not necessarily be comfortable with doing in person. Again, it's another advantage to you as the person being interviewed, that you can actually have that in front of you.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think that's a good point. For the students, there's a secondary poll going on, if you would be so kind as to fill it out. We're just asking, prior to the information that's been shared, did you believe there to be a difference between preparing for in-person versus virtual? We have about 78% of the results in. Some of the students believe that there was no difference, meaning 53% so far have told us that they didn't think there was a difference. I'm happy to hear that piece of it in this day and age. So we'll share the remaining poll results in a moment. If we can move on now to our next, being mindful of time. So one of the things that we've noticed in the Career Center is companies are leaning heavily on online interviewing in certain industries, particularly investment banking and accounting, especially for the initial interviews. What are you seeing in your own individual industries right now?
Alex, do you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, obviously lots of video focused interviews. I think, for what I do, there's a lot of, and obviously, as I mentioned, I moved to healthcare relatively recently. So prior to that, I was doing a lot with tech, a lot of people who are in the IT field. And there was a lot more take-home assessments being done, hacker rank type technical tests, things that they would normally maybe do on a whiteboard, if they had a person coming in person, but they're sending a lot more of that home. And I think people are kind of, jumping to a video, interview rather than a phone. There's still a lot of phone interviews happening. I think a lot of managers still want to be able to kind of multitask, do a phone interview while they're checking emails and doing other things. And when you're doing a video, it's much more difficult to do that. But I am seeing a large increase in first rounds jumping to video, where first rounds would normally be phone screens, prior to the COVID environment.
Yeah, I mean, just based on my personal experience, I guess I kind of thought this would be too, I mean, being in the graphic design field, I would often get design assessment tests for positions, and that would often be, before I even was scheduled an interview, because they want to make sure that what you're bringing to the table is what they're looking for. And I've also had interviews where it was like a pre-recorded message and then you record yourself answering a question. So, and that would be another way that they would like assess before like scheduling an interview.
Do either of you believe that it's more difficult to make a connection with an interviewer via Zoom or any other virtual platform
Than in person, you're saying? I mean, I think it has its limitations. I think, even though in the world we're in right now, we're relying a lot on Zoom technology to be able to connect with people. I don't think it's the ideal scenario. I don't think it's like necessarily like a bad substitute. I think that a lot of communications that are virtual now are more than acceptable. I don't think you're hindering yourself in any way by meeting someone or talking about a possible job position for the first time over video.
Yeah, because you're in the same position. It's all about how you're doing versus your competition. And if you're interviewing for a job, is your competition going in person? No. I mean, if they're interviewing people now via video, everyone's interviewing via video. So you're at the same wavelength as everybody else. You're not disadvantaged by, interviewing via video. It may be different. The person who's interviewing you may not like interviewing via video as much as they like interviewing via in person. But if they're trying to make a hire, they're going to have to, do it. They're interviewing everyone via video, so they're going to have to do it this way, one way or another. I still think it's important, as I always do in any type of interview scenario, to build a relationship with the person, as much as you can. Obviously, they have a goal of what they're trying to get from you information-wise. You have a goal of what you're trying to get from them information-wise. but as much as you can to try to build a relationship with somebody. Sometimes it's as simple as, commenting on what's in the background. You could, say to someone, hey, nice flowers, or hey, I like that lamp behind you. Something as simple where you could try to have some level of conversation piece, to discuss. I wouldn't necessarily put things behind you just so you have something to discuss, but some of us are all the time now. I'm on Zoom calls with people where someone's kids are walking in, or I have a colleague who I always have a meeting every other day with, and often she'll be sitting across, and her cat will walk across on the desk behind her. So you can always have some kind of talking piece, and I always recommend seizing those types of opportunities. It's a good schmoozing tactic.
Great, thank you, Bill. One of the platforms that we've been hearing about is HireVue. Again, based on those two industries that I had previously mentioned, investment banking and accounting. What are others that you're familiar with, and are there particular platforms that your industry currently uses?
So for me, HireVue is a big one that's being used. Bank of America is one of our company's largest clients on the technical side, and they're almost exclusively using HireVue for a good portion of their first round interviews, especially for the non-technical positions. HireVue, JobOn, Take the Interview. These are tools where they're not like Zoom. This is a tool where you are going to be looking into the camera, and a screen, and a question comes up on the screen, and it may say, tell me about a time in your life that you've dealt with adversity, and you have to talk, and you're not talking to anybody, you're just recording your answers. So it's a little unique. I think it's a good thing to practice in the mirror, or practice beforehand. If you live with a roommate or a significant other, it's a good thing to try to practice out. Maybe even doing it on the phone, or just imagine that you're talking to somebody. These are all different. They're all different tools that sort of hold the same weight, the same power. They all do the same thing, in the sense that they will ask you a couple questions that you may have to be recording your answer on. This is definitely something I'm seeing a lot of companies utilizing now.
And that's the one-way recording versus this version of having right?
Exactly. I mean, Zoom, Microsoft Teams is one that our company's using heavily as well. Skype, whatever it is, there's all sorts of ones that would actually be more suitable for person-to-person conversations. The ones I was referencing in HireVue, which is being used by one of our clients, is really used primarily for that type of recorded answer.
Great. And what about you, Samantha?
So being at Gotham right now, WebEx is kind of the standard video platform now. You can use it on your computer, you can call in, they use it for everything. They use it for remote interviews. I think it's just a different level of security than Zoom. I think that's all it is. But there's a zillion other types out there, and Google is your friend. If you're using some platform you've never heard of before, I'm sure someone's had the same issue as you. All you need to do is Google, even exactly what your technical issue is. You could probably find an answer that way on Reddit.
Two questions have come in from students, so I'll take those at the moment. One question that's come in is, what would make someone unique when they have to answer that question? What makes you unique? Is there a specific variation in that response, given that we're talking about a virtual interview versus in person? I know you mentioned background images, flowers, a cat, etc. What else could they bring to the table that would make them unique, is one of the questions that are being asked. Does anyone have a response for that? Or is it just the typical response that you—
Meaning how to answer the question, what makes you unique?
How to answer that question, what makes you unique? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my gut reaction is to be funny and to say, well, my mom would say X, Y, and Z. Meaning, like, if I guess it's not a bad question to have an answer prepared for beforehand. But just being honest and playing to your strengths is probably a safe bet to go.
Yeah, I don't think it's any different video versus in person, COVID versus pre-COVID, I think, you would, you would automatically be talking about some things that separate you, whether it's your
Right.
extracurriculars, whether it's what you bring to the table, for that particular job. Again, I often try to find opportunities to build some kind of personal relationship with the person doing the interviews. So, if I'm being asked about something unique, maybe I'm talking about something outside of the particular job. But as long as you're making sure throughout the course of the interview that you are tying in why you're a fit for the job, it's not just important that they like you; it's important that they like you and you're a fit for their position. So you have to make sure you're answering all of their questions and going into why you're a fit for the job while seizing those little opportunities to build a relationship.
Right. I'll continue with our prepared questions, but there are other questions coming in. So I just want to let the students know that if we don't get to all your questions this evening, we will certainly respond back. Some of the questions that are here are really pertaining to the Career Center in terms of questions like these. So I'll go back to our prepared questions for a moment. So during this pandemic period, have there been any changes in the nature of online interviews that you've observed?
Well, I think in the beginning, the energy I was kind of getting from the market, I guess, was like a little bit like scrambled energy of like, how do we switch over? And now I'm kind of feeling like this is probably the way it's going to be for a little while, especially because, I mean, I've been at companies where they use video interviewing, and then the in-person interview honestly was almost like a formality. It was like hard to screw up. So I guess you're not going to have that step for a little bit probably. And, it's not that much different if you were applying to something out of state. They wouldn't necessarily fly you in right away, but I don't see, for me personally, like I don't see much different besides for it going virtual.
And
what do you think?
Are you recruiting in a healthcare capacity, or are they specifically only on the marketing communication side of it at this point?
So I'm strictly communications. I don't see patients. I do have to like vet vendors sometimes, and interns, stuff like that.
Right. And Alex, I know you just stepped into the healthcare recruiting side. Has there been a drop in recruitment, or has there been a rise? I know healthcare is just freshly new, but where you were previously.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare has been hectic. I mean, I've been involved with healthcare really since the start of the pandemic. Healthcare has been a very hectic environment. They've actually gone to, in some cases with some of our healthcare clients, they were skipping interviews entirely and going straight off people's resumes to really bring people aboard. A lot of the hospitals that we were working with were working at a rapid fire pace to bring on respiratory therapists and registered nurses. Obviously, in the environment, especially being here in New York, things were amplified. But overall, I haven't seen a huge change. It was really, maybe this isn't slightly what you were asking, but I think if anything, companies are more willing to look at people who are going to be working partially remote for a period of time. Where companies would be maybe looking for somebody 5 days on site no matter what. Yeah, I'd say that the nature of online, interviewing has changed a little bit because they're willing to consider people who are no longer maybe as local as they were. Maybe people who had a little bit of a tougher commute who were like, yeah, we can only really go in there 2-3 days a week. And the other 2 we need to work remotely for this position to be interesting. Clients are more willing to consider people like that. And even more willing to kind of say, yeah, if you need to work remote for the next few months, it's fine. We can, bring you in when all this is sort of, subsided. But I have to agree with Sam. I don't think, the nature of online interviewing as a whole has changed, that much. I just think it's become a more focal part of the overall interviewing process.
And that brings me to the next question, which is, do you think that after the pandemic subsides, and I know that it seems farther away than we think at this point, but do you think companies will go back to in-person interviews, or that companies will continue with online interviewing as the new standard?
So I think for this one, in-person interviewing is always going to have a place in interviewing. But I wouldn't expect it to jump right back into in-person interviewing. I'd say that the environment that we're in right now for a lot of companies is going to continue at least for the next, at least through the end of the year, maybe the next 12 months. I mean, many companies that we work with, a lot of them aren't New York based, but many companies that we work with have already announced that, and this is not on the healthcare side, they've already announced that they aren't going to go back into the office until, after December 31st. So I would consider that online interviewing is going to continue to remain a large piece of this puzzle, and that people should be ready to interview online for a good portion of their process, realizing that depending on the company, a lot of companies have kind of stepped into the environment realizing that, like, we don't really need people in the office. I mean, again, our company has always been a company that's in the office, but we are a very self-sufficient company working remotely. It's all about making sure your people are motivated. It's a challenge for a manager to try to make sure that you're keeping in touch with people you normally see in person every day. But yeah, I think this is something that's going to continue at least for the next 12 months with a good portion of companies. But in the future, looking beyond just sort of our next job search, in-person interviewing will always have a large.
And Sam, do you have
No, I'm not to say that like it's not even just the interview part that's changing. I haven't, Alex, I don't know about you, but now working in healthcare, I'm considered essential, which I never thought I would see. But I've been going into the office most days. A lot of my friends that work remote full time at home, the way that they're being managed has changed. So I just kind of wanted to like bring that up, that like you might have had a job in college where you were in the office, but the way that you're going to be managed remotely might be different. A lot of companies are using technology. I mean, it gets to a point where they're like having like screenshots taken of your screen to see what you're working on. If you're at an internship, they want to make sure you're being productive. You might have to keep track of like your time on projects to be able to report back what you did on that day. So that's obviously a different topic, but I just wanted to reiterate that I personally don't think that we're going back to anything after the pandemic. I think we're moving forward in the world after the pandemic, and I think there's a lot of companies that are going through challenges. There's also a lot of companies right now that are going through major innovations in the way that they are productive. So it's a really big changing landscape, and I think it's probably hard for anybody to really predict what's going to work out the best in the end. But I think it's just about making the best decisions you can and being as prepared as you can for what's to come.
Great, thank you so much. Just to close out, is there any final advice that you would give students to best prepare for upcoming interviews? Whether it's the lighting that you'd be using, your technology, I know you mentioned a lot of these pieces already. What would you say is your closing piece of advice for the students?
My biggest thing it would be what I've talked about earlier, which is just do everything you can to connect and build a relationship. Be memorable. I don't think it's any different than interviewing in person in that sense, in terms of the best advice. Obviously, again, we already referenced, dressing up a little bit, making sure that you are dressing up, that you're checking your technology, that you're getting fully prepared for the interview that you're doing. But again, I think anything you can do to take that relationship and be memorable and connect with the person, make sure you're looking them up on LinkedIn beforehand if you know who you're going to be speaking with. Try to figure out if there's any connections that you guys already have, whether it's people, whether it's college, whether it's interests, whatever it is. Talk a little bit about yourself. Try to find a way into talk about them a little bit. Ask them their thoughts on the organization. Be ready for some questions. One of the things we didn't really talk about, I just want to make sure I mention, is I think depending on the kind of position you're interviewing for or looking for, role plays are becoming more common. I think companies are looking for different ways to try to figure out if you're going to be a fit for their role, and I think without having the in-person interview, they're trying new things whether it's role plays, whether it's situational type questions. So you have to kind of be ready for anything on these interviews, but you can't practice for what you don't know is coming. So the biggest things I can suggest are, dress up and look for ways to connect with the person that you're.
Thank you for sharing that. Samantha, were you going to say anything different than that?
Yeah, well, I think the only thing I was going to say is that, as much as we're talking about the preparation for the interview, which, if you, wear the suit jacket and make sure your technology is, those are some of the easiest things on your checklist you can do to make a good first impression. But I also just wanted to mention, if you're as prepared as you can be and you're in the middle of the interview, you just got to go with it at that point. You got to take it easy, and you've done as much as you can at that point, and kind of just make sure that at the end of the day, they know that you're a good person to work with, and that you can bring to the table what they're looking for. That's kind of the main thing that you want to get across.
Thank you both for sharing. At this time, I'm going to share my screen with the students with some additional resources that the Career Center has available for them. So let me just put that up for a moment. So we have a number of platforms that I wanted to share with the students that you can use. Alex, you referenced doing some role playing, maybe some mock interview prep. So the university has a platform called Big Interview, which is a self-guided virtual interview platform that the students do have access to. So I encourage you all to sign up for that. I've hyperlinked everything here, so all students will be getting a resource page that they can go and follow the hyperlinks to participate in this, but it is a web-based version for mock interviewing prep. You're also welcome to do mock interviewing prep with someone in the Career Center as well. We also have Vault available to students, which is our career advice section, which has interview tips and questions. We have now launched a Canvas page, and within it, within our Career Center tip sheets, we have interviewing information available. And the last thing I wanted to share with students, which was launched recently, was LinkedIn's interview prep. And if you search under the job section, and you click on more, there's an interview prep with AI technology that students can also use to do some more practicing. So I do encourage students to take part in any of one of these resources in addition to speaking to the members of the Career Center. And then additionally, we have some articles that we wanted the students to also reference. 2 of them are from HireVue, and they are specifically on how to prepare. I know you listened to Samantha and Alex share a lot of great points this evening, and I really do appreciate you both doing that. But there are other articles that you can check out. The most recent one is from Forbes on 5 useful tips to ace your virtual interview. I know one of the students was asking specifically about lighting and all those things. I think the main takeaway, which I felt that I gathered from this conversation with both of you, is that there isn't a lot of variation with the interview. You still should be preparing as you would for any other interview. Dress for the job that you want, and really checking your technology. That seems to be the biggest component, right? Preparing for that interview, it also now includes that technology component. But the advantage you have, as you both had shared, was you do have your computer in front of you. You can have things printed out. You have access to these resources that you otherwise wouldn't probably bring to the interview for that face-to-face, right? You'd be memorizing a lot of this information beforehand. And as Samantha said, once you're in the interview, you own it, right? At that point, it's on, it's live, make the best of it, connect with the recruiter. I think that's the biggest takeaway. I appreciate both of you this evening. I know there were from subsequent questions that the students were asking. We're a little pressed for time, but I will discuss those questions with Alex and Samantha if we didn't get to them, and I'll send out a message to the group. To all the students, you'll be getting a short survey from the department after this session, and a great thank you to you both this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.